Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Before factories, cars, and cities, Britain was a land of farmers. Then everything changed. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point not just in British history, but in the history of the world. It began in the mid-18th century and transformed Britain from a rural agrarian society into an urban industrial powerhouse. This was not a sudden shift, but a gradual wave of change powered by groundbreaking inventions like the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom. These technologies revolutionized production, allowing goods to be made faster, cheaper, and on a much larger scale than ever before. As machines replaced manual labor, the economy shifted dramatically. Cottage industries gave way to factories, and small villages grew into bustling towns and cities almost overnight. People left the countryside in droves, seeking work and opportunity in the new industrial centers. This mass migration led to rapid urbanization, overcrowded housing, and significant changes in how people lived and worked. Society itself was reshaped. New classes emerged, including a powerful industrial middle class and a growing urban working class. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how people made things. It redefined what it meant to live, work, and belong in a rapidly modernizing world. Before the Industrial Revolution, Britain was a predominantly rural and agricultural society. Most people lived in small villages, surrounded by farmland where daily life was shaped by the seasons and the rhythms of manual labor. Families worked the land using simple tools, growing crops, and raising livestock mainly for their own needs or for local markets. There were no large factories or sprawling cities, just tight-knit communities where everyone had a role in the village economy. One of the key features of pre-industrial Britain was the cottage industry. In these home-based workshops, families produced goods by hand, especially textiles. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing were done in people's homes using basic equipment like spinning wheels and hand looms. This allowed families to earn extra income during slower agricultural months. The wool trade, in particular, was central to the early British economy. British sheep produced high-quality wool, which was spun into yarn and woven into cloth that was sold across Europe. Wool and textiles became valuable exports, and this early industry laid the groundwork for Britain's later dominance in textile manufacturing. Trade during this time was limited and local. Roads were poor, transportation was slow, and markets were often small and scattered. Most goods were produced and consumed within the same region, and few people had contact with the wider world. Life was relatively slow-paced, shaped by tradition and community, until the forces of industrialization began to transform everything. Britain became the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution not by accident, but because it had the perfect mix of conditions for such a transformation. One of the most important factors was its wealth of natural resources. Britain had abundant coal and iron, two critical materials needed to power machinery and build infrastructure. Coal became the fuel that drove steam engines, while iron was essential for making machines, tools, and later railways and bridges. Britain's network of rivers and natural harbors also made transportation of raw materials and finished goods much easier, long before railroads were built. A stable government and strong legal system created an environment where innovation and investment could flourish. Unlike many European nations that were frequently disrupted by wars or political unrest, Britain offered security for entrepreneurs. The rule of law protected property rights and contracts, encouraging people to take financial risks and invest in new technologies or businesses without fear of sudden seizure or collapse. Another major advantage was capital, money that could be invested in industry. Britain's global empire and its involvement in colonial trade brought immense wealth into the country. Profits from plantations, the slave trade, and overseas markets gave British merchants and financiers the means to fund new inventions, factories, and infrastructure projects. This influx of capital helped build the foundations of industrial growth. Britain also benefited from its geographic position and naval strength. Surrounded by the sea and equipped with many ports, it was easy to import raw materials and export manufactured goods. The British Navy, the most powerful in the world at the time, protected trade routes and ensured safe passage for ships carrying goods across the globe. This allowed British manufacturers to reach distant markets and grow their businesses far beyond local demand. Finally, the spread of scientific thinking and Enlightenment ideals played a key role. Britain was home to a culture that valued knowledge, experimentation, and progress. Inventors, engineers, and thinkers were inspired to question traditional methods and seek better, more efficient ways of doing things. This intellectual climate encouraged innovation and helped fuel the technological breakthroughs that powered the Industrial Revolution. With all these elements combined, Britain had the perfect conditions to launch a new industrial age. The Industrial Revolution was driven by remarkable inventions and visionary innovators who transformed entire industries and changed the world. One of the most important breakthroughs came from James Watt, a Scottish engineer who greatly improved the steam engine in the late 1700s. Earlier steam engines were bulky and inefficient, but Watt's design made them far more powerful and practical. His engine could be used not only to pump water from mines, but also to power machinery in factories. This invention became the heart of the Industrial Revolution, providing reliable energy for textile mills, ironworks, and eventually, locomotives and ships. Another key figure was Richard Arkwright, often called the father of the modern factory system. In 1769, he invented the water frame, a machine that used water power to spin cotton into thread much faster than by hand. Arkwright's innovation allowed for large-scale production and led to the creation of the first true factories. These factories brought workers and machines together under one roof, completely changing how textiles were made and laying the groundwork for modern industry. Building on earlier spinning technologies, Samuel Crompton developed the spinning mule in 1779. This machine combined features of both the spinning jenny and the water frame, producing a finer and stronger thread. The spinning mule could spin multiple spindles at once with much greater efficiency, revolutionizing the textile industry even further. Crompton's invention helped Britain dominate the global cloth trade and created a massive demand for cotton, which had global economic consequences. Transportation was also transformed during this time, thanks in part to George Stephenson. Known as the father of railways, Stephenson built the first successful steam-powered locomotive and helped design the first public railway line to use steam engines. The Stockton and Darlington Railway opened in 1825. A few years later, his famous locomotive, the Rocket, set speed records and proved that rail travel could be fast, reliable, and commercially viable. Railways soon crisscrossed Britain, speeding up the movement of goods and people like never before. These inventions were more than just mechanical achievements. They completely reshaped industries, labor, and society. Factories replaced home-based production, steam-powered entire cities, and railways connected distant regions. Visual animations or images of these machines in action, spinning wheels humming, steam engines churning, locomotives racing across the countryside, help bring this revolutionary period to life, showing how innovation drove the world into a new industrial age. The Industrial Revolution transformed several major industries, changing not only how goods were produced, but also how entire economies functioned. One of the first and most dramatically affected was the textile industry. Before industrialization, textiles were made in homes through the cottage industry system, slow, manual labor carried out by individual families. But with inventions like the spinning jenny, water frame, and power loom, textile production moved into factories. These large buildings housed rows of machines powered by water or steam, capable of producing vast amounts of cloth at high speed. This shift not only increased output but also centralized labor, bringing thousands of workers into urban centers to operate the machinery. The iron and steel industry also underwent a dramatic transformation. Iron had long been used for tools and weapons, but with new smelting techniques and steam-powered furnaces, production became faster and more efficient. As a result, iron was used on a much larger scale, for building bridges, constructing machinery, and laying down the tracks for the rapidly expanding railway system. Later, the development of steel, which is stronger and more flexible than iron, further boosted construction and manufacturing, enabling the creation of modern infrastructure, ships, and advanced weaponry. Coal mining became another critical industry during this period. Coal was the essential fuel of the Industrial Revolution, powering steam engines, heating factories, and driving machinery. Demand for coal exploded, and mines expanded rapidly, often at great human cost. Miners, including children, worked long hours in dangerous and unhealthy conditions to extract the fuel that kept the industrial machine running. Coal became the backbone of Britain's industrial energy supply. The transformation of transportation was another major development. Before the Industrial Revolution, moving goods and people was slow and expensive. The creation of canals allowed for cheaper movement of heavy goods over long distances. Then came the age of railways, thanks to innovators like George Stephenson. Trains could transport goods and passengers quickly across the country, connecting previously isolated regions. Steamships soon followed, replacing wind-powered vessels and allowing for more reliable sea travel and trade. This transport revolution drastically reduced travel time, lowered costs, and opened new markets both domestically and globally. Together, these transformed industries laid the foundation for modern industrial economies. They fueled massive growth, created new jobs, and permanently altered the way people lived, worked, and moved through the world. As the Industrial Revolution gained momentum, Britain experienced a massive wave of urbanization. Small towns rapidly grew into industrial cities as people left the countryside in search of factory jobs. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool became the heart of this transformation. Manchester, once a quiet market town, exploded into a bustling center for textile production. Birmingham thrived with metalworking and machinery, while Liverpool grew as a major port, connecting Britain to global trade. These cities expanded at an incredible pace, but not without serious consequences. Living conditions in the new industrial cities were often harsh. Housing couldn't keep up with the growing population, leading to overcrowded tenements with poor ventilation and little sanitation. Entire families lived in single-room apartments, crammed together in damp, dark buildings. Streets were filthy, often running with sewage and lined with garbage. Clean water was scarce, and pollution from coal smoke filled the air, turning the skies gray and covering buildings in soot. With so many people living in close quarters, diseases like cholera and tuberculosis spread quickly and killed thousands. Daily life for workers, especially in factories, was grueling. Factory work meant long hours, typically 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. The work was repetitive, exhausting, and dangerous. Machines had no safety guards, and injuries were common. Workers were often fined or punished for being late or making mistakes. Children as young as 5 or 6 were employed in both factories and mines because they could fit into small spaces and were paid less than adults. They worked long hours too, often in brutal conditions that stunted their growth and damaged their health. Visually, the contrast between the green, open countryside and the grimy, crowded industrial towns was stark. In the country, life was slow and tied to nature, with wide fields, clean air, and a strong sense of community. In industrial cities, the view was dominated by smokestacks, dense rows of brick housing, and endless noise from machines. This dramatic shift in living and working conditions reflected the human cost of progress. Industrialization brought wealth and power, but it also introduced new social challenges that Britain would struggle with for generations. The Industrial Revolution didn't just transform industries, it reshaped the very structure of British society. One of the most significant changes was the rise of two new social classes, the working class and the industrial middle class. The working class was made up of millions of men, women, and children who labored in factories, mines, and mills. They lived in crowded urban neighborhoods and worked long hours in harsh conditions, forming the backbone of the new industrial economy. At the same time, a new middle class emerged: factory owners, merchants, bankers, and entrepreneurs who gained wealth and influence through industrial success. This group began to rival the old landowning aristocracy in power and status. As cities grew and industry expanded, rural lifestyles began to fade. Many traditional jobs, such as hand weaving or small-scale farming, disappeared as machines and mass production took over. Villagers left behind centuries-old ways of life, abandoning farms for factory work. This shift led to the decline of rural communities and the erosion of age-old customs and social structures. The countryside, once the center of British life, now played a secondary role to the booming cities. While industrialization created great wealth, that wealth was unevenly distributed. Factory owners and investors made fortunes, building grand houses and enjoying luxuries that were out of reach for most. Meanwhile, the working class struggled with low wages, poor housing, and little job security. The divide between rich and poor widened, creating deep social tensions that would later fuel reform movements. The roles of women and children also changed dramatically. Many working-class women joined the labor force, especially in textile mills, where they operated machinery for lower pay than men. Children were often forced to work long hours in dangerous environments, sacrificing their education and health. Though women gained some independence through wages, they still faced inequality and had few legal rights. These changes sparked early debates about gender roles, education, and labor rights. As conditions worsened, workers began to organize. The earliest labor movements and trade unions emerged in response to exploitation and unsafe working environments. Workers demanded better wages, shorter hours, and safer conditions. Though these early efforts were often met with resistance from employers and the government, they laid the foundation for future reforms. The struggle for workers' rights would grow stronger in the decades to come, changing labor laws and improving life for millions. The Industrial Revolution, while bringing progress, also forced Britain to confront new social and economic realities. As the harsh realities of industrial life became impossible to ignore, the British government was eventually forced to respond, with reforms aimed at improving conditions for workers and the urban poor. One of the earliest and most important areas of reform was labor regulation, especially concerning child labor. The Factory Acts, passed throughout the 19th century, began to place limits on how long children could work and set minimum age requirements. The 1833 Factory Act, for example, made it illegal for children under 9 to work in textile factories, and required factory owners to provide some basic education. Later acts expanded protections, shortened the workday, and introduced safety standards for all workers, not just children. Another major concern was public health. With industrial cities growing rapidly and often without planning, poor sanitation and contaminated water led to deadly outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhoid. In response, the government passed public health acts in the mid to late 1800s. These laws required local authorities to improve drainage, clean streets, and provide access to clean drinking water. While progress was slow and uneven, these reforms marked the beginning of government responsibility for urban living conditions and the health of its citizens. At the same time, there was a growing push for education and moral reform. Reformers believed that education could uplift the working class and reduce crime and poverty. As a result, more schools were established, and laws were passed to make elementary education available, eventually compulsory, for all children. Religious and philanthropic groups also worked to instill values like discipline, hard work, and sobriety, aiming to civilize the urban poor through moral instruction. These reforms were not immediate or perfect, but they signaled a shift in how the government viewed its role. For the first time, authorities began to recognize that unchecked industrialization came with serious social costs, and that the state had a duty to protect its people from the worst abuses of the new industrial world. The Industrial Revolution's impact didn't stop at Britain's borders. It reshaped the world. What began in the factories of Manchester and the coal mines of Wales soon spread across Europe, the United States, and eventually to countries around the globe. Nations saw the power and profit industrialization could bring and raced to adopt similar technologies and systems. Railways, steamships, and telegraphs began to connect continents, shrinking distances and enabling global trade on a scale never seen before. Alongside this expansion came the rise of capitalism, an economic system based on private ownership, competition, and the pursuit of profit. The Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for this new world, where factories, banks, and markets became central to daily life. With mass production came mass consumption. Goods became cheaper, more varied, and more widely available. People began to buy more than just what they needed to survive. They bought to express identity, status, and lifestyle. This marked the birth of modern consumer culture. But this growth came with a cost. As factories burned coal and cities expanded rapidly, the environment began to suffer. Rivers were polluted with industrial waste, city air turned black with soot, and forests were cleared to make way for industry. These were some of the first signs of environmental degradation caused by human activity on a large scale, a problem that would grow more urgent in the centuries to follow. Despite the challenges, the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for modern technological societies. It sparked a culture of innovation and invention that continues today. From electricity to computers, space travel to artificial intelligence, much of what defines the modern world can be traced back to the first machines powered by steam and coal. The revolution forever changed how people live, work, and relate to the world around them, ushering in the modern era. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshaped every aspect of British life, from the way goods were made and transported, to how people lived and worked, to the very structure of society itself. It transformed a mostly rural, agricultural nation into the world's first industrial superpower, setting the stage for rapid technological progress and urban growth. The changes brought great wealth and opportunity, but also new challenges like harsh working conditions and environmental pollution. The legacy of this revolution is still with us today. Many of the systems, technologies, and social changes that began in Britain during this period continue to influence the modern world. From the factories and cities to the consumer culture and global trade networks, we live in a world shaped by the industrial age. In essence, Britain sparked a revolution that would not only change its own destiny, but also shape the entire modern age.